Hi folks, Rob Flux here from Property Developer Network, coming to you once again for a Sunday session. Sunday sessions, for those of you who are new, are all intended for, I guess, new up-and-coming people trying to learn the property development process. There are a number of issues and challenges that you need to learn along the way, and this is, I guess, an introduction to property development. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it's certainly enough to let you know, I guess, some of the things that you need to consider along the way. This week's topic, we're going to be talking about protected trees and what you can and can't do in and around protected vegetation. Now, before we do, we're going to talk a little bit about some of our upcoming dates, give some people some time to come on board. I can see a couple of people popping on as we speak. Remind everybody also that we highly encourage you to ask questions along as you go with these Sunday sessions. So please, at any point, please ask a question. There is a small delay between you typing it and me seeing it, which means that sometimes I don't see the question instantaneously. So please be patient with that. That would be fantastic. While we're waiting for a few more people to come on board, just going to tell you about some upcoming dates. Our next meetup is in Brisbane, and that's on the 15th of June. We're going to have a very interesting topic there. We've actually got the people from Dial Before You Dig coming on board. So that's first time that I think they've ever done a meetup such as ours. So a little bit of a coup for us to actually have that. It's an important service, Dial Before You Dig, trying to understand what is and isn't underground before you actually dig up the ground. So I can see Jason saying hi, can see Dave and Alex and a couple of others on there as well. So hi to everybody. So yeah, the Dial Before You Dig one would be very interesting. If you're in another state and you are an annual member, then I would highly encourage that you actually go back and watch the recording of that one once it's done. So that's the 15th of June. And then after that, our next event will be in Sydney on the 29th of June. There we've got Nick Tuxworth from Savills going to be talking to us about some of the opportunities and challenges that he's seeing in and around the rooming accommodation space and also the sales space. They specialize in a number of those unique opportunities. So that will be fantastic. Hi to Barb, and Alex says, looking forward to Dial Before You Dig. Yes, me too. And then last event coming up will be Melbourne on the 6th of July. And then we have a gentleman by the name of Anthony Solce. He's from a company called Capital Stack. So if you're wanting to understand development finance, then that will be a great one as well. So some other sessions that are coming up. Anyone who is interested in the property development process at all and not sure whether or not it's going to suit you, we are going to be doing an Around the Grounds in Sydney, Melbourne, and in Brisbane with an info session before our meetups in some dates coming up soon. So we give you plenty of notice now so that we can determine that. We're going to talk to you about what is involved in, I guess, the property development journey and also a little bit about our property development formula course. If anyone is interested in those, in Sydney, we will be doing an info session on the 27th of July. In Melbourne, we'll be doing one on the 3rd of August. And in Brisbane, we'll be doing that one on the 17th of August. So some time away now, but this is us announcing those dates right now, because we're coming into our intake for our next round of main events. Those main events being the Psychology of Property Development and also our Property Development Formula course. So anyone wanting to know anything about any of those, they're the dates coming up. So I can also see a couple more coming aboard. So I can see Cam and Barb. So hello everybody there. Now, our topic for today, significant trees. So I guess there are a number of different things that you need to consider when talking about trees, and it's really going to come down to where that tree is actually located. So firstly, is the tree located on your property? Is the tree located on your neighbor's property, or is the tree located on the nature strip? Okay, so how and where that tree is will actually depend on how and what you can do, even if the tree is not protected. So, and then there is what you can do if it is protected. So you can see Kev on board as well. Hi, Kev. welcome back, mate, or your first Sunday session. Welcome back into the fold. Okay, so if the tree is actually on your property, then the tree is actually your responsibility to maintain and manage and trim and prune and all those sorts of things. However, if you actually want to remove the tree, or even if you want to trim the tree, you need to make sure that the tree is not protected, and hence the topic of the day. If the tree is on your neighbor's property, then assuming that it's not protected, then the only thing that you can trim is the portions that actually hang over your side of the fence. You can't trim it back past your side of the fence. And if it's on the nature strip in any way, shape or form, then it is completely council owned and protected, I guess, in and of itself. So you can't go trimming those, I guess, without prior approval. So I guess that's talking about where it's lying, but then there's the what if it's actually protected, and how are some of the things that might actually protect it. So a tree can be protected in a number of ways, and this is going to be very subjective to each council that you're going to be involved in. So they may have some slightly different terminologies. There are 537 different councils, so I can't cover all the terminologies for all of the councils, but there are a number of different ways that the trees can be protected. So the first one could be if it's inherent in the zoning, okay? So in some councils, there is a thing called emerging community or future urban or similar names, which basically means that the area has not yet been populated. They anticipate that the city is going to grow there. There's going to be a little bit of urban sprawl going towards there. And they're looking for developers to install all of the infrastructure services to the area, and also to propose to council what should actually be living there. Now, in doing that, there is an inherent protection that sits on the underlying trees that will require you to actually do a report on all of the trees on the property to determine their size, their age, their significance, their shape, and the like. So you'll need to lodge one of those reports if you're in an emerging community or future urban type situation and trying to do some urban sprawl. Also, the other ways that it could be protected are a thing called an overlay. So an overlay is an item that, like a map, it sits over the top of the map and actually adds a little bit of extra value, information, I should say, to the map. So in this instance, there are a number of different overlays that you need to be conscious of that may trigger the fact that there are some significant trees or protected trees in the area. So one of them would be an overlay called a significant landscape tree. Another one would be one with environmental significance. Another one would be any wetlands overlay, or a waterways and or waterways corridor overlay, and a bushfire hazard and or bushfire protection. Any of those overlays will typically have some element of reference to, I guess, the vegetation underneath, and may require you to actually do some sort of report back to council before you can actually go and just natively remove those trees. The other ways that trees can actually be protected is on an individual basis, and that tends to be what is called a vegetation protection order. Now, generally, a vegetation protection order has come about because somebody within the community has nominated that tree to be of some form of significance. When they've nominated the tree, then council will then go and do a one-off inspection of the property, the property being the tree, and determine whether or not that's actually protected. Now, assuming it is, it then goes onto their register. Some other elements that could trigger an overlay is if there are any heritage and or covenants. So any heritage overlay or anything like that. Now, the heritage could be protecting the house, it could be protecting the vegetation in the area, but if there is some form of heritage, then you need to be conscious of what that is, okay? There are also some individual councils have some some things that are not necessarily on public record. So, for example, Brisbane City Council has one called the Natural Assets Local Law, or NAL. Okay, a number of other councils have a similar non-public record, and that means that a tree could actually potentially be protected on that register. And so you've got a number of different layers that you need to actually go and consider. And so the best thing that you can do, I guess, go and search the zonings, go and search the overlays. They're going to tell you the really obvious ones, but they won't tell you the ones that council have actually protected without your knowledge. And so it's going to be, the onus is going to be on you to actually dial into council, give them a phone call, and check to see whether or not there is actually some protection. Now, most councils can give you a response within 24 hours. If not, you will typically get a response within, I'm going to say, within a week, to say whether or not there's any protection or protected trees on that property. Now, if they have to do a site inspection, then it may actually take anywhere up to 20 days for them to actually come out on site. But they will typically have a yes or no as to whether or not there's any protection. And if there is a no, then you're able to actually either trim the tree and or remove the tree. If the answer is yes, then it really depends on what that protection actually is as to what you can and can't do. And whatever you need to do will generally need to be done via a permit, which I'll touch on in a moment. Some other ways that trees can actually be protected is actually as part of a development condition. Now, what that means is when you actually go to lodge your application, council will then use that as an opportunity to review all of the vegetation on the site at the time and determine whether or not there is a tree on there that, whilst is not protected right now, is something that they would like to protect as part of the development conditions. Now, because of that, and I guess you being, developers trying to make sure that you're minimizing your risk, what you want to make sure is if you have no protection on the trees at the moment, that there is no tree that is actually going to get in the way of your proposed development. So it's not in the middle of your building pad, for example. Now, I'm not condoning in any way, shape or form to just blanket remove every single tree on the property. However, it is very, you should be very conscious of the fact that because council can protect at the point of lodgement, that you want to make sure that there is no tree that could potentially trigger that protection, and that tree then become a problem with your future development side of things, okay? Now, assuming that the tree is protected, then there are things that then come into what is called a protection zone of the tree. So areas of the tree that are completely in and out of bounds, depending upon what the nature of the tree is. So if it's a council tree, it's pretty much all out of bounds, okay? If it's on your property, you can do one set of things. If it's on the neighbour's property and it's overhanging your property, then you can do some stuff as well. So let's talk to the neighbour's property. So anything where the tree is not protected, but the tree hangs over to your side of the fence, you are allowed to trim up to the tree line itself. Sorry, up to the fence line itself, I should say. So that anything that is on your property, you're allowed to trim back to. If it's in the rest of the tree being in the neighbour's yard, you can't actually do anything with. Now, depending upon how close it is to the fence and how large the tree is, you need to be very careful that if you're chopping just one side of the tree off, that it may actually make the tree a little bit top heavy on one side, which may actually structurally weaken the tree. So you want to make sure that you're not endangering the tree in any way, shape or form in doing that. If the tree is then protected and it's on your property, then there's a couple of other protection zones that you want to be conscious of. So one is, what can you do with regards to trimming the tree? Now, every council will have a slightly different variation on this percentage. However, if you're wanting to trim the tree, then you will generally need to have an approval from council or some sort of permit. and depending upon the council, it can be anywhere from 5 to say 20 issues or challenges. Now I can actually see that we're having some poor internet connection here, so I'm hoping that this is actually working. It does say trying to reconnect. I'm going to keep talking until it does connect. Can somebody give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down as to whether or not they can actually hear me at the moment, please? Because my internet has just said that it is dropping out. Well, this could be tricky. Well, I'm getting a couple of thumbs up, so I'm going to just keep on talking. The other areas that could be protected, yep, getting a few thumbs up, so that's good. The other areas that would be protected are what is called the root bowl. So the root bowl is the area of the tree that is the root zone. And generally, for most trees, that root zone is going to be very similar in physical size to the actual canopy that is above it. Now, that's going to be very slightly different depending upon every single species, but generally the root bowl is going to be physically a similar size to the actual canopy itself. So you can't dig in and around that root zone. So make sure that you are very careful with that. So a couple of people saying everything's working, can see and hear you. That's good for you, I guess. Or depending upon if you like the look of me, I guess. Okay, so if you do have something protected, then it's generally because it's some form of native tree. So council will generally not try to protect non-natives. That said, if the tree is massive in some way, shape or form, they have been known to protect non-natives, but as a general rule of thumb, they won't. So if you are one of those people who knows and understands what your tree species are, and you know that it's a non-native, then you've got a fairly reasonable chance that it's not protected. That said, you should always make sure that you go and seek that permission with regards to the property, with regards to council approvals and that sort of thing. Council tends to care about those native species, as I said. They want to make sure that they're unique to the area and region. They don't want to have what might be a native to Australia, but not necessarily native to that particular region. They're going to make sure that it's going to be something that's going to assist the flora, fauna, etc. For the area. Now, one of the things to be cognizant of is that some of those protection areas that I spoke to before, particularly the overlays that sit in and around the areas such as environmental significance, those areas can, in some councils, be what they call aspirational overlays. Now, an aspirational overlay means that there may be no trees in that area right now, but council can see a number of other large plantations of trees in the area, and what they're wanting to do is allow a corridor to connect all of those little pockets up, so that our flora and fauna have a way of actually jumping between the trees and getting from one little area to the other. So whilst you may not necessarily have trees on your property right now, one of the things to be very careful of is those aspirational overlays that then protect you and say, well, you can't actually build within this particular zone. Now, by way of example, Brisbane City Council have just updated a whole bunch of environmental overlays in and around that area that are very aspirational in nature. And so I highly encourage you that any properties that you may have looked at 6 or 12 months ago, those overlays will have changed and the mappings have changed on those. So you want to be very careful with some of those. Now, if you need to get a permit to do any work on those trees, there are generally a couple of different kinds of permits that you're going to get. So if it's inside your yard, you may get a short-term permit, which is just a one-off. So you're just going to do a one-off trim because there might be a couple of loose branches and that sort of thing on one particular tree. So you can get some short-term work. Or alternatively, if you know that this tree is constantly dropping, maybe it's a brittle tree where it's got brittle branches and that sort of thing, you may actually get a permit for some long-term work, which might be anywhere from 3, 5 to 10 years, depending upon your council, and will allow you to actually keep on trimming that tree for that entire period. The last kind of permit that you're going to need are council street tree permits. Now, generally, the permit that you'll get there will require that council actually do the work. And when council do the work, they can, depending upon what the nature of those works are, they can actually have a charge back to you for that. Now, generally, council will not charge for things like brittle branches, things that are just straggly, or where they're actually interfering with electrical lines. But they will charge you where you want to remove a tree, for example, or trim a tree back if you want to install a new driveway for your development. Now, generally, not only will they charge you for the removal of the tree, but they will also potentially charge you for the installation of a new tree in some way, shape or form somewhere else in the community. So you hit with a double whammy there. So one is the cost of removal, and the second one is the cost to reinstall. Now, council will always use their own contractors in that regard. So you're pretty much not able to get the cheapest job. You must go with the council provided person in that regard. Now, assuming that the tree is on your yard and you believe that it's protected by over those zonings or overlays or some of the things like the vegetation protection orders, etc., then how and what do you do to actually apply to council to justify the fact that you want to have the tree actually removed? Generally, you will need to engage an arborist. Okay, an arborist is a specialist who has, I guess, done years of study about native trees. I guess their healthiness, whether or not they are native to the area, those sorts of things. So they're not just your local horticulturist. They actually have a degree in arborology, if that's the word, and they will actually generally do a report up to council to determine the size of the tree, the age of the tree, the healthiness of the tree, and whether or not it's actually adding significantly to, I guess, the native flora and fauna of the area. Depending upon what you're trying to do, I guess some arborists are going to be very much about, well, we must protect the tree at all costs. Other arborists are going to be very pragmatic in that they understand that, trees are a very good thing and we need to have them around, but equally we need development. So when you go to get that arborist report, be conscious of the fact that the person who you're getting that report from may be in one of two camps, and so you want to make sure that they are very certainly development friendly. So make sure you ask around your community, depending upon how and where you are, as to who the friendly arborists are in your particular area. Now, generally, the arborists will need to be not only qualified, but they'll generally need to be certified either with the local council or with the the state, I guess, appropriate arborist institutions. And so there's actually a thing called a diploma of arboriculture. Sorry, my apologies for not articulating that well. So, they'll need to be qualified, and they'll also need to be certified, and they'll actually need to be on council's approved consultants list. So you can't just get Joe Public from around the corner to go and report on those. Now, if you're so that's basically, I guess, a little bit of an overview on what we can and can't do with regards to trees. So my guidance would be, if you're looking to do a development at all and you're worried about whether or not your tree is protected, the very first thing that you should actually do is give council a call. So, I mean, you can certainly look on their local planning portals, and they will show you all of the things that are publicly visible. But as I touched on before, many councils don't have all of that information actually publicly visible. So it certainly pays to actually make a lodgement to council, give them a phone call, lodge a job, get them to actually give you a yes or a no that there are no trees on there. If you're going to be then doing a development application and there is a tree that is significant in size and you believe that tree may have some level of, it might be in the way of what you want to do with your development, my guidance would be to actually remove the tree before the application is actually lodged. That's going to make your ride a lot smoother. If you have the approval to remove it right now, then do remove it right now. That means that the council can't retrospectively apply that protection to you. So that said, that's kind of all I was going to cover today in and around protected trees. I can see a lot of people on board. I haven't really seen any questions come through. So now's the time. If you've got any specific questions that you want to ask, there is a small delay between you asking the question and me responding. So I'll give you a little bit of a moment to write a question while I take a tiny little sip. I guess whilst I'm thinking of it, some of the trees that are native that tend to be very commonly protected, just while we're waiting for some questions to come through, fig trees, mango trees, poincianas, jacarandas, any native pines, eucalyptus trees, forest red gums, what they call a tallow wood, or a scribbly gum. Those sorts of things are the most common ones, I guess, across Australia, but certainly in in individual areas, then there might be, I guess, a local native tree that is protected that isn't protected anywhere else. Clint says, what happens if you remove without approval? So Clint, there will be fines. The cost of the fine is variable depending upon the council itself. In all of Queensland, the fines are based on a thing called demerit points, and the demerit point is actually, each demerit point actually has a monetary value to it. So hypothetically, it might be 500 demerit points, and the demerit point might be worth $170, for example. So that's 500 times 170. The state government determines what the value of the demerit point is. The local government determines how many demerits there actually are. If you can just give me 2 seconds, please. Sorry, guys, just a bit of background noise here. I just had to quiet that down. Yes, so the answer is it can be quite significant. It can also involve legal fees, not only legal fees, but actually jail time as well, Clint. So I would highly recommend to not remove unnecessarily. What are the costs for and process to remove, etc.? So assuming that you've actually got your approval, so it would be get a arborist report to determine to lodge the application. There may actually be an application fee. Generally, council will take anywhere up to 20 days to assess your application to determine whether or not the tree is actually protected or not. And in doing so, they will generally come by and physically visit site, have a look at the tree, have a look at the health of the tree. Whilst you've given them an arborist report on that, they will always want to make sure that they actually investigate that. And then after that, it then comes down to whether or not it's you removing the tree or council removing the tree. If it's you removing the tree, then I guess a normal everyday tree lopper can come by. There's two ways to lop down a tree if anyone has not ever done any tree lopping. One is, I guess, the very slow and careful way. That's where you climb the tree and with a chainsaw, you just break off one branch at a time, let it drop to the ground. The people that actually do that will generally go up there with harnesses and spikes, tie themselves in, and they will quite often tie the branches that they cut off to a rope as well and lower those down gently. So that's, I guess, the safe and secure way, and you'll generally do that when you're near electrical lines, where you're near houses that need to be protected. You don't want it to land on things, that sort of thing. The other way is the less than careful way, and that's where you climb to the top of the tree, throw a rope around it, you get a whole bunch of boys leaning on the rope at the bottom, and then just one fell swoop and cut it at the bottom, and the tree comes down in one hit, and then you chop it up in pieces. So depending upon how close you are to things that need to be kept safe, depends on the two approaches. Obviously, it's a lot more expensive to bring it down slowly and carefully. If you're fortunate enough to be able to bring it down in one fell swoop, then you'll be able to get rid of them quickly. Hopefully that answers that. The actual cost itself, Clint, is going to be very subjective based on the size of the tree and quantity of the trees. I'm doing a backyard at the moment. We're close to 3,000 square meters. I'm going to say 30% of the property is covered in trees, and that's about $20,000 to remove those, including stumps. So give you an idea about that. Alex says, when would an environmental offset be payable in lieu of removing trees? That's a good question, Alex, and environmental offsets are not available to every single council, but effectively it is a way of council saying, well, the trees that you've got in your area, they are native, they could and should be protected, but there's no local flora and fauna that's going to be dependent on those specific trees. So what council will say is, we will allow you to remove them conditional on you installing or paying for some similar trees to be planted somewhere where the flora and fauna actually are going to be utilizing that. So every council has a different version of that. Some councils don't allow it at all. Others can do. Costs will vary significantly. So my guidance on that would be to make sure you actually talk to your council. Scott says, I think you may have covered this before I got on. So if you have a native tree on a property that does not show up on any overlays or protected trees list, does it still need to remain? So I did actually cover this cost, Scott. It's not about whether it's just a native, it's about whether or not the tree is protected. So if it's small enough, then chances are it won't be protected. If it's large enough, then it may be protected. And so there's a number of zonings and or overlays that may actually trigger whether or not that is actually covered. So my guidance, Scott, would be a rewind. That's pretty much the first 5 minutes of what I've actually covered here. Now, I guess while I'm waiting for some other questions to come through, when your arborist comes out to determine the species of tree and also the size and age of the tree, generally what they'll do is they'll do a measurement around the diameter of the trunk. Now, in most councils, it's about 1.2 to 1.4 meters above the ground. You then put a measurement around the trunk, see how wide that is. So if you can identify what the species of tree is and you know what the size is, you may be able to, and I'm certainly not somebody who's very good at identifying tree species, but if you are, then you may be able to determine whether or not that tree is likely to be protected, or whether or not the arborist report might be protected. So one of the things that you could do is very cheaply just go and measure all of those, go to your local nursery store with a photo of the tree and say, what is this tree, please? And then you can look up on the table for the local council to say, well, if it's this size tree, would it actually be protected, yes or no? If it does trigger something, you know that, or even if it doesn't, but you get a good insight as to whether or not it's worth your while going down the path of engaging with an arborist, because obviously an arborist is actually quite an expensive task, and equally the timeline can be quite expensive as well. So if you do that small little free version, you may determine whether or not you have a go, no-go type situation on your particular property. So that said, folk, that's kind of the end. I can see Carmel's just come in right at the very, very tail, so you're going to have to rewind that, Carmel. So that's the end of this. I do want to remind everyone of some upcoming dates. So our next meetup in Brisbane is on the 15th of June. That's where we're going to have Dial Before You Dig actually coming in and talking about how and what you do with regards to underground services, and some of the issues and challenges if you have accidentally dug some services up. In Sydney on the 29th of June, we've got Nick Tuxworth from Savills Real Estate Agents. They're going to be talking about the state of the market and some particular unique property types, specifically rooming houses, boarding houses, those sorts of things, and a few others. And then in Melbourne on the 6th of July, we've got Anthony Sols from Capital Stack going to be talking to us about finance and development finance sides of things. If you, once again, if you're looking to, we're coming into our next round of intakes for our property development formula course and also our psychology of property development. If you have any level of interest in those at all, we'll be running some info sessions about that and how to get into the property development game. We'll be running those sessions in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. So the dates for those, we've still got a fair way out at the moment, but the 27th of July in Sydney, the 3rd of August in Melbourne, and the 17th of August in Brisbane. So they'll be the mornings of our normal meetups in those groups. So effectively giving you 2 months notice for the bulk of those. If you have any interest at all, please reach out and we can keep you updated as to how to do that. Other than that, folks, I can't see any more questions. So I'm going to, I guess, give you one more moment whilst I take a sip. And if I don't get any questions come through, I'm going to call that a day. Well, I can't see anything there. So thank you, folks. Hope you enjoyed that. And we will see you once again next Sunday at 5 o'clock for our next Sunday session if we don't see you at a meetup before then.